The receptionist at the Meridian Club asked Adaeze Nwosu if she was there for the catering team. Not once, twice. The second time she smiled and said it with her hand already gesturing toward the service entrance on the left side of the lobby, as if the direction itself would be easier to process than a verbal answer. Adaeze looked at the woman's hand, then at her face. Then she reached into her coat pocket and produced the membership card, the gold-edged kind that the Meridian Club had been issuing to its founding patrons since 1987, and she held it out without a word. The receptionist's smile didn't disappear, it shifted, adjusted into something more careful. Of course, welcome back, Miss Nwosu. Adaeze put the card away and walked in. The Pinnacle Forum was held every November at the Meridian Club in downtown Toronto. In the main hall on the 3rd floor, where the ceilings ran 15 feet high, and the windows overlooked the lake. It was one of those rooms that felt like an argument. Everything in it, the crown molding, the oil portraits, the particular weight of the carpet underfoot, seemed to insist that certain people had always belonged here and certain people were still making their case. The forum itself was quiet in the way that only old money events managed to be quiet. Conversations happened at a particular volume, not low, not conspiratorial but controlled, contained. The way people speak when they've spent their entire lives being listened to and have learned not to waste the effort of raising their voices. Adaeze moved through the room slowly. She wore a charcoal gray suit, no accessories except her watch, an old one, analog, the kind that didn't announce itself. Her hair was natural, pulled back in a low knot. She carried nothing except the small portfolio tucked under her arm. She did not rush. She did not scan the room for friendly faces. She simply moved through it the way she always moved through rooms like this one, reading them, noting who was comfortable, who was performing comfort, and who was so accustomed to belonging that they'd stopped thinking about it entirely. Several people assumed she was a junior associate. One man near the bar asked her if she could find out whether they were serving the Burgundy or just the Bordeaux tonight. She told him it was both. She had been in this room before. Not this exact room, but this exact experience. The 3-second calculation that happens in the minds of people who have only ever seen power dressed a certain way. The quiet recalibration that follows when someone doesn't fit the image. She already knew what they didn't. She had endowed the scholarship program that funded 2 of the emerging professionals, currently circulating the room with canopies. She had been the first external board member to flag the forum's historic pattern of excluding women-led firms from its investment panels 6 years ago in a letter that the current executive director had framed and hung in his office, because he liked to think the organization had always been this progressive. And next week, the firm she had built over 17 years, Nwosu Capital Partners, with offices in Toronto, Vancouver, and London, would be named as lead anchor investor on the largest infrastructure deal in Canadian private equity history. But none of that was visible yet, and she was in no particular hurry for it to be. She found a space near the far end of the main hall, close to the windows, and stood looking out at the lake. The water was dark and flat in the November evening, the city lights on the other side spreading out in long reflections. She stood with the particular stillness of someone who had learned, over a long time, that stillness was a form of information. That was when Roland Fitch found her. She noticed him before he spoke. Mid-50s, silver hair worn slightly long, the kind of suit that costs enough that it stops looking like it cost anything. He moved through the forum the way a man moves through a room that has always responded to his presence, without checking, without adjusting, with the complete physical ease of someone who had never once been directed toward a service entrance. He looked at her, the way people look at a detail that doesn't quite fit the composition. Not hostile, not yet. Just that quiet, assessing pause that tells you precisely how someone has already categorized you. He stepped closer. His expression arranged itself into something that wanted to seem welcoming. "I don't think we've met," he said. "Are you one of the associates from Pemberton?" Adaeze looked at him steadily. "No." He waited. When she didn't continue, something shifted behind his eyes. Mild irritation dressed as friendliness. "First time at the forum?" He tried again. "Not quite," she said, and turned her attention back to the window. She heard him recalibrate, decide to try again. "Roland Fitch," he said, extending his hand. "Managing director at Fitch Hargrove. We've led close to 40 deals through this forum over the years. I practically grew up in this room." He said it with the warmth of a man who assumed shared appreciation. She shook his hand. "Adaeze Nwosu." "Nwosu," he repeated, testing the name the way some people test unfamiliar food. "And what brings you to the forum this evening?" "The same thing that brings everyone," she said. He smiled at that, but it was a smile that didn't quite land anywhere. He glanced at her portfolio, at her watch, at the way she was standing, and she could see him doing the arithmetic, trying to locate her in the hierarchy of the room. She didn't help him. Warren Price arrived then. He was younger than Roland, early 40s, managing partner at a mid-market firm that had recently started positioning itself as a leader in sustainable infrastructure. He had the practiced confidence of someone who had been told he was exceptional since the age of 12, and had spent the subsequent decades confirming it. He joined Roland's side with the easy familiarity of a man who knew every other man in the room. He looked at Adaeze once, registered something, and then addressed Roland directly. "Good crowd tonight," he said. "I heard the keynote's been pushed back. Something about the Vancouver flight." "Always the Vancouver flight," Roland said, and they both laughed in the comfortable way of people sharing a reference they didn't need to explain. Then Warren looked at Adaeze again, more deliberately this time, at her suit, at her natural hair, at the way she was standing apart from the main cluster of the room. Something in his expression arranged itself into the particular shape of a man who has decided to be generous. "Forgive me," he said. "Are you with the mentorship stream, the emerging leaders cohort?" "No," Adaeze said. "One of the panelists' assistants?" "No." He blinked. The smile stayed, but it required more effort now. "I apologize. I just assumed." "That's all right," Adaeze said, not unkindly. "Most people do." She turned back to the window. Warren was not a man accustomed to being left without a last word. He recovered quickly, the way people do when they've had decades of practice pretending they weren't just dismissed. He said something to Roland in a lower voice, something she caught the shape of without catching the content. Roland chuckled. Then he raised his voice just enough that the two men standing nearby would hear him. "It's a different world than it used to be," he said, with the particular tone of a man who believes himself to be adaptable. "The forum has made an effort to be more inclusive. Diverse candidates, emerging voices, all of that. It's good, of course. Necessary." He paused. "It does create a certain dilution of the traditional culture, though, the kind of rigor that built the forum in the first place." One of the men nearby nodded slowly. Warren smiled. He had found his register. "Capital allocation is a precision business," he said. "You can democratize access to the conversation, but the actual decisions, the institutional level moves, those still require a particular kind of track record. A particular kind of network. You can't shortcut 17 years of relationship equity." He said it smoothly, pleasantly. The way people say things when they want the content to land without the accountability of intention. Adaeze continued, looking at the lake. "That's the uncomfortable truth no one wants to say out loud," Roland added. "Experience isn't transferable through a diversity initiative. You either have the runs on the board or you don't." There was a quiet around that sentence. The kind of quiet that isn't silence but is people choosing not to speak. Adaeze turned. She looked at both of them with the calm, direct gaze of someone who has heard variations of this conversation for the better part of 2 decades, and has stopped being surprised by it, and has also stopped performing the reaction people expect when they've said something they want to be deniable. 17 years, she said to Warren. "What does that get you, in your experience?" He seemed pleased to be asked. 2 exits north of $800 million. Lead positions on infrastructure deals from Calgary to Montreal. The kind of institutional trust that, he gestured vaguely, you build through relationships. The right rooms, the right tables. "That's a good run," Adaeze said. She turned back to the window. Roland was watching her now with the particular expression of a man who has been made to feel something without being able to locate the source of it. "And yourself?" he asked. "What's your background?" "Capital allocation," she said. The pause that followed was brief but complete. Warren set his glass down slightly too carefully. He was about to say something else when the forum's executive director, a compact, precise man named Elliot Gerber, began making his way across the room with the focused movement of someone who has spotted the person they've been looking for since they arrived. He was not looking at Roland. He was not looking at Warren. He crossed the room in a straight line, excused himself past 2 conversations, and stopped in front of Adaeze with the expression of a man who was both relieved and apologetic. "Adaeze," he said quietly, "I am so sorry. The AV team had a question about the slides for your announcement and I couldn't find you. Can I steal you for 10 minutes before we open the floor?" Roland Fitch went very still. Warren Price's mouth closed around whatever he'd been about to say. Elliot touched Adeeze's elbow briefly, the gesture of a man navigating a room on behalf of someone important, and steered her gently toward the corridor near the stage. She moved with him without hurry. As she passed Roland, she did not look at him. Not because she was making a point of not looking, simply because she had nothing left to locate in that direction. The announcement was scheduled for 8:30. By 8:25, the hall had settled into the particular attentive quiet of a room that knows something is coming. The screens at the front of the hall, which had been cycling through the forum's historical highlights, grainy photographs of handshakes, black and white portraits of founding members, went dark. Then Elliot's voice came through the room, clean and formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Pinnacle Forum is proud to formally open this evening's program. It is my genuine honor to introduce the anchor investor and lead partner on this year's centerpiece announcement, the founder and chief executive of Nwosu Capital Partners. Please welcome, Adaeze Nwosu." Roland Fitch looked toward the main entrance. He had already arranged his expression. the appropriate deference, the forward-leaning readiness that signaled he knew how to receive important people. Then Adaeze walked onto the stage from the corridor on the left, and the screens came alive behind her. The room did not erupt. It went still, the way rooms do when something has shifted and everyone feels it before they can name it. Then the murmur began, the low, urgent kind, the kind that moves through a crowd when the information is too large to absorb silently. The screens showed the Nwosu Capital Partners portfolio in clean white text. 17 years of investments, 4 exits above 1 billion. A flagship infrastructure mandate spanning 6 provinces. A photograph of Adaeze at the announcement signing in Ottawa, seated across from 2 federal ministers. Another one from the Vancouver Infrastructure Conference, at the main table, not a side table, not a courtesy placement, the main table. A headline in bold, Nwosu Capital confirmed as lead anchor on the $4.2 billion Northern Corridor infrastructure deal. Warren Price's champagne glass was in his hand. He didn't appear to register it anymore. Beside him, Roland had gone very quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a man in his element. The other kind. The kind that comes when the room has rearranged itself around you and you have not yet figured out where you now stand within it. The 2 men who had been nodding along 20 minutes ago were no longer positioned beside Roland. They had drifted one step, then another, the slow, undramatic migration of people who are recalculating their proximity to a liability. On stage, Adaeze stood at the podium without notes. Her voice, when she spoke, was even and carried easily, the voice of someone who has learned that certainty doesn't require volume. Nwosu Capital Partners was built on a single conviction, she said, that the most consequential capital in this country is still making decisions based on who was in the room 40 years ago, and that the deals we're missing, as an industry, as a country, are the direct result of that failure of imagination. The hall was silent in the specific way that happens when a crowd is trying to be still and present without performing either. The Northern Corridor mandate is the largest infrastructure investment in Canadian private equity in a generation, she continued, and it was built on a network and a track record that did not come from this room. She paused, without drama. It came from doing the work in rooms that most people in this hall never bothered to look for. She let that settle. We are announcing tonight that Nwosu Capital will be allocating 30% of the deal's advisory fees to the Meridian Emerging Leaders Fund. Not as a gesture. As a structural commitment to ensuring that the next generation of capital allocators doesn't have to spend 17 years proving they belong at a table that was built, in significant part, from the communities they come from. She did not look toward the back of the room where Roland was standing. She didn't need to. The applause, when it came, was full and immediate. Not the polite, measured kind. The kind that happens when a room is also applauding itself for being present for something. The formal dinner that followed was a different room than the cocktail hour had been. Not physically, but the air had rearranged. Investors who had spent the pre-dinner hour performing ease were now performing something else, positioning themselves closer to the people who had been close to Adaeze, trying to reconstruct their proximity to the evening's center of gravity. Roland made 2 attempts at conversation with colleagues near his table. Both responses were brief, polite, and final, the particular finality of people who have heard what they needed to hear and are now busy revising their contact lists. Warren left before the dessert course. He didn't say goodbye to Roland. He was simply there, and then, between one moment and the next, he wasn't, and Roland found himself standing in the middle of a room that had stopped finding him interesting. He found Adaeze on the upper level, in the long corridor that ran above the main hall, overlooking the atrium through a glass railing. She was standing at the window at the far end, looking out at the lake again, the same view. But the silence around her now was different from the silence at the beginning of the evening. Earlier, it had been the silence of a room that hadn't noticed her yet. This was the silence of a woman who had said what she needed to say and was under no obligation to fill the space afterward. Roland almost didn't approach. He had run out of other directions to go. "Mrs. Nwosu," he said. She turned. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked, if anything, as though she had expected this part. "I want to apologize," he said, and he meant the sentence to sound like a beginning, but it came out like an ending. "What I said earlier, what Warren and I both said, was dismissive. It was wrong. I should not have assumed." "What did you assume?" she asked. He stopped. The question was direct and without hostility, but it cut cleanly through the version of the apology he had prepared. "I assumed you were." He stopped again. "Someone who hadn't earned the room," Adaeze said. He didn't answer. But he didn't look away. "You weren't uncomfortable saying those things when you said them," she said. Her voice was even, unhurried, the same voice she had used on stage. "You were comfortable. You were enjoying the conversation. The apology you're offering me right now isn't for my benefit. It's for yours. You want to be able to go home tonight and tell yourself that you addressed it." Roland looked down at the carpet. "You didn't dismiss me because you thought I was too junior," Adaeze continued. You dismissed me because the possibility that I might belong in this room in a way you didn't immediately recognize, that didn't occur to you as a serious option. That's not a mistake of information. It's a mistake of imagination. And no amount of apology in this corridor is going to fix that. She looked at him for a moment longer, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with the particular tired clarity of a person who has had this conversation enough times to have stopped expecting it to resolve into anything useful. The money will do more than the apology, she said. Use it. She picked up her portfolio from the windowsill, straightened the strap on her shoulder, and walked back toward the corridor stairs without looking back. Not because she was making a statement, because she was done. The story moved faster than the forum newsletter. A video of Warren's comments near the main hall, caught on someone's phone, was shared through 3 Bay Street group chats before midnight. By the following morning, it had found its way to 2 financial journalism outlets, who had also helpfully pulled the press release on the Northern Corridor deal and placed it directly alongside the footage. The contrast was legible to anyone. Roland's name became attached to a sentence that circulated with particular persistence online. The managing director who told the lead anchor investor of Canada's largest private equity deal in a decade that she probably hadn't earned the room. It was not a sentence anyone at Fitch Hargrove's communications team had any reasonable way to contextualize. Warren's firm issued a statement, then revised it, then issued a second statement that did not substantively improve on the first. The Meridian Emerging Leaders Fund received 47 inquiries from institutional investors in the 72 hours following the announcement, a number that had required in previous years the better part of a full calendar cycle to accumulate. But the moment that stayed with people, the one that kept circulating weeks later, long after the news cycle had moved on, was not the announcement. It was not the stage reveal. It was a photograph taken the following Thursday outside the Meridian Club's main entrance on King Street. Adaeze stood on the pavement below the building's facade, looking up. Above the main entrance, where the forum had hung its founding portrait for 36 years, a formal oil painting of the original 12 founding members, 12 men, all of them white, all of them looking at something just to the left of the viewer. Workers on a lift were carefully, methodically taking it down. In its place, piece by piece, a new commission was being installed. A portrait in a different register entirely. A woman, dark-skinned, composed, lit the way the original founders had been lit, with the particular seriousness that oil painting reserves for people it considers permanent. She looked like someone who had always been on the wall. She looked like someone who had never needed the wall to tell her that. Adaeze watched until the installation was complete. She watched the workers step back and evaluate the frame, adjust it by a centimeter on the left side, step back again. She watched until it was level and certain and done. Then she put on her coat, tucked her portfolio under her arm, and walked through the front entrance without a backward glance. Not because she had proven something, because she had never required the proof to begin. If this story made you feel something, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Lost Soul Stories TV for more stories about the people who built their own rooms when no one would open the door. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment that hit hardest for you? The corridor conversation or the portrait going up on the wall?